What is going on, and welcome to another episode of the Time Killers Podcast, a show about games, movies, and everything else we kill time with. My name's Neil Rivera, and I'm once again killing time with a man who is trapped on a hostile alien planet, fighting for his life, trying to get back home. It's Matthew Field. What's going on, Matt?
Once again, I'm here.
How's Carcosa been treating you? We've been playing through Saros. I've beaten Saros, but how you finding the cruel, hostile alien world this go round?
Yeah, it is certainly cruel and hostile. I can say that much.
But yes, that's right, guys. We are here. We're talking about Saros. I'm really excited to talk about this one with you guys. But we are also talking about Mixtape. We're going to be jumping into the discourse there in a big way. And then Matthew has a Marathon Season 1 recap for us. We've been holding off talking about Marathon. We wanted to let all of Season 1 play out. And so now that Season 1 has culminated in the big endgame event, Matthew's here to sort of give his impressions and thoughts on the first season of Marathon. So look forward to that. But before we jump into all that, we want to remind you guys that you can listen to past episodes and find us on your social network of choice at timekillerspod.com. Don't forget to DM us your questions, your comments, and hot takes once you follow us. And if you're listening to us on a podcast service, please don't forget to subscribe to us, leave us a review, and let us know how much you love us. Don't forget to leave us your thoughts and suggestions as well. We're always open to new ideas and suggestions and evolving and growing this show together with you guys. All right, enough about that. Let's jump into Saros, our big review. This is the latest from Housemarque, Sony first party studio, so being published by Sony Interactive Entertainment, released on April 30th of this year, PlayStation 5 exclusive, which it's another part of the conversation that we can talk about is that it's not coming to PC. It's not going to be a PC release at any point. Sony's pulling back from releasing their first party exclusives on PC. So yeah, I mean, this is, as of right now, like trapped on the PS5, you got to own one to play it. So quick overview, this is the not sequel, but sort of spiritual successor follow up to Returnal. This fusion of Housemarque's sort of arcade style gameplay sensibilities, but pairing it more with a traditional over-the-shoulder third-person shooter gameplay, mixing in those roguelike elements, permadeath and losing progress and things like that. Returnal, very much a difficult game. Saros, the big emphasis or sort of the big tweak here going into Saros was making it more approachable. Difficulty modifiers, they added these Carcosa modifiers that allow you to change things like the damage that you're dealing, the damage that the enemies are dealing toward you, things like the corruption that builds up and other perks and debuffs. We can get into, that system once we get into, deeper discussion of the game. But that's a big part of it, right? Like, it's just making it more approachable. And yeah, I mean, I'm going to take the lead on this, Matthew. After playing through and beating Saros, as having, I mean, I guess I should also preface this by saying I didn't play much of Returnal. Matthew did play a little bit of Returnal in the lead up to this review, so he's got a little bit more experience with it, with it than me. But, for me going into this, I played a little bit of Returnal, bounced off just because of the difficulty, and so the approachability was really, it felt like this was sort of targeted towards me, someone who was sort of turned off by that difficulty. And so yeah, going into Saros, man, and having played through it and beat it, and having sat and like marinated on the game for a while now, it's my front runner for game of the year right now, like easily, I think by a country, but I would say by a country mile. There's a lot that I can say about it, really, like off the top, like, the art direction is just out of this world. As someone who, went back and looked at some of Returnal, just seeing how they leveled up the design sensibilities of Returnal and just really honed in on it. And like this game does so much and communicates so much to you visually that I never felt like I was bogged down in tutorial menus or felt like I was frustrated learning the like the sort of rules of the world and like how things, how enemies behaved and the way, I was supposed to interact with the different attacks. All of that sort of felt like it came naturally, and just the way that the game presented itself visually goes a lot, went a long way in doing that for me. In talking about the story, I think it gets off to a little bit of a shaky start. I think we can, I think that's kind of where you can levy the most criticism on this game, is the narrative kind of, is so compared to Returnal. I would love to hear, your thoughts on that, Matthew, at least based on what you played. But by the end of it, man, it made me think a lot of it made me think video essay thoughts, you know what I mean? Where I was thinking about just Arjun as a main character. Shout out to Rahul Kohli, who does a phenomenal job playing Arjun, the main character. But it really made me think, more than just the story and like sort of what plays out with the characters. It made me think more about like what Arjun represents and commentary that it's making on men and, like men's mental health and things like that. There's a lot that we can get into with this. So with that, Matthew, I'm going to pass it to you. How long have you been playing Saros, and what are your thoughts on it so far?
So I'm pretty far into Saros. I played I think about 18 hours. And I don't actually know how many biomes are in the game, but I have to think that I'm pretty like I have to be just like one or two away from the end, I would guess.
Yeah. Are you at Cathedral? Have you been there yet?
Yes, I think that's where I am. It's where you're blocked because you can't run up the stairs, right? At the beginning?
Yeah.
That's
so
the zone
after that you're like, I think you've got like one or two after that. So you're close for sure.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I think I have some really, for you saying that this is like your front runner for game of the year next to Marathon, which we'll talk about later. This game is the game that I have the most complicated thoughts on that I've played this year. In that I really, really like a lot of it. And I think when you look at a lot of when you start to pick it apart, there's like, there's some really inventive mechanics. There's some really cool things it's doing. I mean, like the one off the bat is the art direction, which you mentioned. I think this is like probably the most impressive art direction of any Sony first-person title this console generation. I think they spent their art budget in a way that was they set out to do something unique. They had a vision and they really executed on it by taking clear inspirations from like old like 80s manga or anime, with some of the grungier sci-fi aesthetic.
Even stuff like, modern, like I got a lot of like Doom and Warhammer and like a lot of like futurist, like dark futuristic, like it was where like a lot of it, what it evokes.
Yeah. And they blended it with, like the Cthulhu-esque almost, like cosmic horror type vibe, which I think it all comes together really well to feel totally unique and and just very, very fully formed. So I think that's like the one thing that I can come away from this saying, like unequivocally, like the art is amazing. I love the art in this game. But then you start to talk about how it plays, how the different runs piece together, and the progression between those runs. And I start to have, more issues with some of it.
going back to like Returnal, the sort of main, I would say, pain point with Returnal was that ultimately, like the end, like the final ask that the game was making of you was to go from start to finish, permadeath without dying. No checkpoints, no, like level select, like you went from start to finish in a single run. Is that accurate, right?
Slight spoilers for Returnal here. The game is essentially split in half. So you have, there's 6 biomes total. Each run is 3. So you get a checkpoint after you finish the first 3 biomes. And then you can progress, like you do another run for the other 3 essentially.
Got it. Okay. But still, it demanded more endurance from you, where this is giving you more, like checkpoints, so to speak. This is more like a traditional roguelike setup where you're going out, you're doing a run. If you die, you're coming back. If you win, you come back, and then there's some sort of extra wrinkle that changes the world that you can go out and do, additional runs and progress the story.
This seems to trend more towards the roguelite, like LITE formula, in sort of a Hades model, which we can talk about some of the Hades influences here. I think that's sort of a touch point in what they attempted to do with this. To mixed success, I would say more negative, like mostly missed on that opportunity here. But yeah, and then Returnal was more of a rogue-like. And, if you've never played either of these games, you may be wondering why we're spending such a large amount of time talking about Returnal when we're talking, when this, we're ostensibly talking about Saros here. It's basically because the game invites that. I mean, this is a sequel in all but name, basically. Mm-hmm. I think there's even a case to be made that these games take place in the same universe.
Okay.
Based on things you can find in these levels and in these worlds. But yeah, I mean, there's really no question that these games are, and they've said as much. They Housemarque, the developers, have said that we felt like we had something really special with Returnal, but it just didn't quite have. It didn't. They not enough people got to see the end of it, and so they set out. After getting essentially acquired by Sony to make a variant on that that would allow more people to see the end of it. And my general feeling on that is that they did solve the approachability problem here. The issue I have with it is that the solutions that they implemented to solve it are mostly unsatisfying to me.
Yeah. Elaborate on that. Cause I was going to say, like, what are the, like, what's the, like, where do you feel like they've missed the mark in terms of like the structure this go around?
So I'll start with the biggest grievance of mine, which is the skill tree.
Okay.
I would probably, I don't want to hyperbolize here, but this may be the worst skill tree I've ever played in any game I've ever played.
It's certainly unbalanced.
What do you mean by unbalanced?
Like it doesn't feel like, I never felt like my progression through the skill tree reflected any sort of like, it never really kept the pace with the progression I was making in the game. Like, and we can talk about like the skill tree in like more detail, but like, it's boss gated. So like there's progression that is gated by the bosses, but I felt like I was clearing bosses without having cleared like the previous boss on the skill tree. So like I felt like there was something, like I felt like I was powering up too much from the skills that I was unlocking in the earlier stretches, that like I never felt like I needed to go, like push into the higher tiers. I really only pushed in the higher tiers like when I was doing like late game stuff. So
yeah, I mean, I sort of agree to that. It was inconsistent with me. So yeah. I would have some zones that I would like literally one shot. I actually had like 2 zones back to back that I one shot. But then the zone after that, I started getting crushed. And it was because I hadn't boosted my skill tree up enough from the like, you know, from the currency that you get from runs, win or lose, which I guess we should clarify. You're picking up these orbs, Leucinite. Along, and if you teleport back to your base, you get to keep all of it. If you die, you keep like a certain percentage of it that you can still use to upgrade your skills on the skill tree in between runs. So what I found was that because I hadn't been dying, like I breezed through these, I didn't get as much Leucinite as the game expected you to have, and so I got kind of stonewalled until I had basically farmed enough of the Leucinite in order to basically be able to like narrowly progress in the next biome. So there's that, like I guess we had slightly different experiences there. I did feel like it was somewhat gating process or gating progress.
I ran into that as well. In the like the bog, I believe, that like swampy biome where like when you do the oh my god, the eclipse, and like everything switches like to like the really swampy, marshy. That's really where I sort of hit a wall. And you know, I was kind of going to segue into the Carcosa modifiers after this, but like that's really when I started tinkering with those, because like I would do the modifiers a certain way for like, okay, I'm actually trying to push forward and progress the story, but then I did adjust them to like, okay, let me farm the Leucinite and let me like make some progress in the skill tree. But all that to go back to the original point where like it definitely feels like the most imbalanced or inconsistently polished, I'd say, part of the experience.
And I mean, and so the other half of this is that it's all entirely passive upgrades. I mean, you're literally increasing stats by like 1 here, 1 there for the most part. Occasionally you'll get like, you get a modification where you can start a run with a key or something that's like sort of meaningful like that. But the vast majority of this is just incrementally boosting your stats, just the slightest amount. So that in a cumulative effect, it will boost you up by a lot, but you're going through tons and tons of these before you get to like, before you accumulate enough to where you really feel the difference. And that also the structure of this tree, I don't know what they were thinking of putting it like this. Like it doesn't branch at all. It just goes straight up. If once you're far in the game and you want to go back to the beginning, maybe you like want to go back on one of the few branches that it has, it just doesn't move very well across it. Like I feel like they should have split this up into multiple trees, like one for each biome, rather than trying to shoehorn them all together. It just makes it a pain to navigate that way as well. So overall,
it seemed like
my experience was just not good with the skill tree.
Yeah, it seemed like they were like trying to evoke the like Diablo skill tree, but they didn't have the meat or like the substance to actually fill it out in a way that felt meaningful. And so it did feel like, I think you could hold down X and have it go like sort of like automate through. I don't know. I felt like there were times where I was sort of glazed over, just like let me just get through these upgrades. You would like sort of pinpoint and target the ones like, okay, I do want like this upgrade, I do want an extra key, or I do want my health, like going, learning from your failed runs. I think that's obviously a big like theme both in the gameplay and in the story, is just learning from your mistakes and just like constantly persisting through and adapting and evolving.
See, my strategy was a bit different. Like mine was entirely to find the cheapest upgrade and then go after it, and then as soon as like the cheapest upgrade became somewhere else, I would go and do that. To try to just maximize the number of stat points that I was getting in any category. Essentially.
I do think the like the skill tree, like they could have streamlined it a little bit more. Like, regardless, I think there's, I think for as little as you're getting out of it, like meaningfully, you're spending too much time in it and like engaging with it. Because like it's definitely not, like I said, it's probably my like what I would point to is like the weakest part of the game. But yeah, going to the going back to the like the I think this is a good part to talk about like the Carcosan, the skill modifiers. How much did you engage with them? Were you tinkering with them consistently? Did you find a setting that you liked and stick with it? What was your experience with it?
I have done very minimal experimentation with it. I've kind of, you can do like what you've done and say like, okay, I'm gonna change this so that like I'm gonna farm. So I want to be able to keep more of my Lucenite. I'm just gonna farm. I don't care about beating bosses or anything. So I'm gonna, maybe put a modifier on that, like would cause one of your items to break after you beat a boss or something. Just because it makes you balance it out. So I can see how you would do that, but that just feels bad to me. Like I don't want to have to go into a run saying, okay, well, I know I'm not going to like progress this run. I just need to like farm, It's like, it just doesn't, that isn't how I want to approach a run. I want to either, and I guess maybe this is a good time to talk about some of the other issues I have with the run-based nature of it. Yeah. There's not, I don't feel that there is enough variance between runs in the same biome. Okay. I don't feel like there's enough, like think about a run of Hades, which, again, it takes from Hades in that like after a run, you get bits of story in the hub where it's like you're talking to characters and stuff to advance plots. Which again, we can come back to that. But when you do a run in Hades, you are getting tons of different like god powers, right? Like you're getting different abilities that fundamentally change the way that you are playing your character. And I don't get that. Like there are very few decisions that you're making in a run in Saros.
Yeah. It's more, the randomization lies more in like the loot drops, but like everything else seems more or less static from run to run.
Yeah, but I mean, even in the drops that you are getting, like the ones that give you certain that either boost your stats or like like the more interesting ones are the ones that you pick up from during the eclipse, which come with a negative modifier and a positive modifier on them. Those are a little bit more interesting because you are at least thinking about them rather than just like hoovering them up to equip or whatever. Which is another mechanic that it takes from Returnal. And I think that was a good one to keep because I think those are the most interesting decisions that you're making during a run. It's not really, I never really thought that much about which gun to use, like when you're getting gun options, because another problem I have with this is that I feel like very few of the gun options that are available to you are actually viable. Like there are certain guns that you, I don't know how you would succeed against certain enemy types with that particular gun type.
Yeah, there were some, like, even some situations, like, outside of the ones where they specifically introduced a new weapon or new weapon type, where it just felt like, 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 I gave up on using shotguns pretty quickly because it just, like, that's a weapon type that I feel like is just not viable. A lot of, the enemy attacks and, like, their attack patterns are based on, like, reaction times and being able to, detect the like the sort of like pattern of their attacks ahead of time, which using a shotgun at close range sort of prohibits you from doing. And then, some of the later weapons that they introduce are just sort of weird and strange and have like just weird firing mechanisms that like, when you're also trying to juggle jumping and dashing and, melee, like a parry a system as well, like it just becomes too cumbersome. So I opted for the smart rifle most of the time, or like any sort of the auto fire weapons that had like the auto aim ability. Occasionally I would use some of the ones that were like heavy hitters, but yeah, like by and large, I would stick to like the auto aim weapons just because, there's a lot to manage in this. So yeah, and some of the weapons just don't seem well equipped for that.
Yeah, I mean, and like I agree. I think the auto rifles, any variant of the rifle, is basically like the best for most situations. I don't even feel like the ones that are harder to use are rewarding you with more damage or anything like that. Which is kind of a shame, because in Returnal I thought basically all of the weapon types were good. I liked all of the weapon types in that, and they didn't bring over what I thought were some of the best ones in that game. So it was a bit disappointing. I will give them props for using like the chakram weapon, which I think is cool and like kind of novel in how it does and how it does damage. But if you're up against a swarm of like small enemies, like you get those packs of enemies that only take like one bullet to kill or whatever, it just is totally unviable to keep like, shooting and then pulling it back, shooting then pulling it back for each one of those enemies that would take like, a second to kill with any other gun. So I don't feel like they got the weapon. I don't know. I don't feel like all the weapons are tuned correctly for it to make them viable for a full run.
And to kind of go back to the like your previous criticism of the skill tree, where like it very much was a viable option for me to say like, okay, I'm going to just hold on to my smart rifle, and if I don't get another smart rifle, I'm gonna just hold on to this smart rifle. And like I was still able to take down the final boss. Mild spoilers, you have to beat the final boss twice to at least get the true ending of the game, and I was able to do it both times with a smart rifle that I walked in with, because I was just unwilling to even engage with some of the other weapons that it was offering me, which like that seems counter to what you would want and what the team over there at Housemarque probably wanted when they were building out this suite of weapons. And like it kind of sounds like a negative, but like I think to this game's credit, there are a ton that just feel really good to use, and like I think it's easy to lock in and find the one that just works for you and just sort of lock in and focus on the actual like enemy and combat encounters, which I would say are spectacular.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think the actual like the second to second combat that you're engaging in during these runs, and even the platforming too, like some of the platforming that it requires to do between firefights while you're navigating the world is all excellent. I mean, the game controls fantastically, and you really need that precision when you're dodging or reflecting all these orbs that the mass number of enemies that you're facing are shooting at you. One other thing we haven't talked about, which I think is a real positive here and a new addition from Returnal, is the shield.
Yeah. I didn't interact a ton with it. I focused more on like dodging and parrying, but it's got its uses. I surprisingly didn't engage with it as much as I thought I would. That was actually one of the things that I was like, oh my God, yes. Like it kind of gives me a mulligan, but I was so like enraptured with just the ways that the enemies are animated, and just like I ended up locking in and finding that flow state just by memorizing their attack patterns and like just tackling it that way, so doing more of a dodge. But what were your thoughts on the shield?
I thought it's really interesting that you didn't use it that much, because I kind of have leaned on it as a core pillar of my strategy. Because you can absorb all of the blue projectiles that get thrown at you. I mean, if you can basically use your heavy weapon like a ton, especially against some of the bigger enemies that are shooting tons of blue orbs. You could just fire like the heavy weapon almost constantly, and it really gives a nice like push and pull as you like absorb all of the orbs they throw at you, charge your abilities, and then just like shoot them back essentially to do a ton of damage. I found that to be a really a really satisfying loop there. And even like with bosses too, when they're shooting like a bunch of different multicolored orbs at you, you only have to find the blue ones, right, to be able to absorb those, and rather than having to dodge them all together, which I thought was a really clever way of kind of putting more orbs on the screen and making you think quick about how you're going to tackle something.
And like I said at the top, man, like this game communicates so much to you just visually, where like, okay, a red orb, like I can't, touch that. Like that's going to do damage regardless. And a yellow orb is going to deal corruption to me. And I have to, fire my heavy weapon to clear that up to then heal. And then the blue, like, yeah, my thing with the shield was that I didn't realize that it did that. It also, doubled as the, absorbing the power for the power weapons until pretty later on in the game. I probably would have used it more, like in that middle stretch had I known that. But like that also leads me to what I did use, which surprised me a little bit even, was the parry. I'm generally not a fan of parry mechanics in this game, but I think just like, pairing with how I sort of locked in and really memorized the boss attack patterns, like being able to identify like where and when to parry instead of doing the shield was really, really satisfying. There's a boss that really in my opinion, relies on the parry, and it just feels so good to take it down using it. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different gameplay, combat options that you have in this. I think that really a testament to just how good the combat design is that they give you a ton of different ways to tackle these situations, and the enemies are still really ferocious and intimidating. Like that's the thing that really struck me as someone who didn't play Returnal, is that like there's a menacing nature to a lot of these enemies. And so like having that full suite of abilities, and like once you master it and being able to sort of turn the tables and like overcome that enemy, is really satisfying. It's a really satisfying experience.
Yeah, I agree. I think the combat here is excellent. And I think, I mean, sort of trying to wrap up my feelings here. I think, I think Housemarque absolutely knows how to make engaging gameplay. And I think they're getting closer to a format that is both challenging in the way they want it to be, but also approachable enough to, appeal to the audience that, Sony needs them to. The other thing that I thought a lot about while I was playing this game is like comparing it to Returnal. Is a game better because I can complete it? And I don't know that I've come down on one side or of the other of that thought, but it's an interesting thought experiment. I think this game is definitely enhanced by having played Returnal. I think the people who are hardcore Returnal fans are probably not going to like this as much as they liked Returnal.
Yeah, it seems like it's been very divisive, both like among people like me who are coming to this more with a fresh perspective versus those who played Returnal.
Yeah, and it's so I don't know. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what they do next, how successful this ends up being. But I think it is. I'll give them props for taking the swings that they did and trying to adapt what they do well into a slightly different format.
Yeah, they're definitely imperfect. Like game makers sounds like a weird way to say it, but like they're imperfect game makers, and I would say that extends to the story, which I think I want to use as my closing thoughts, because that's really what stuck with me the most. By the end of this game, man, like it's like I think there's a lot that this game ends up talking and communicating both through the protagonist, which once again, shout out to Rahul Kohli, who just absolutely kills it and crushes it in this role, but for the way, like I think so much of this game sort of is dressed up in the sort of typical like male power fantasy, right? Like, you know, like I said, it evokes Doom, it evokes Warhammer, these games and these universes with big, strong, burly men. And, you know, Arjun very much falls into that category, but he's very flawed and he's very, like, you can tell that there's something wrong with him. And the more that you play, you know, obviously not delving into spoilers, but like seeing him confront that, I think any guy who calls himself a fan of, you know, the sort of like just big, you know, macho man shooter should play this game, because I think, you know, like he's a commentary on what I would say is like the average shooter fan, and just ways that, you know, we can overcome harm that has been done to us, and just be better as people. So I think there's some really good themes in this game, and, you know, ultimately that's what elevates it above some of the sort of gameplay faults, because I do share some of the you know, criticisms that you have of the gameplay, of the run-based nature. I do think this falls short of Hades if we're, you know, looking at it pound to pound in terms of like, you know, roguelite structure and just how, like, you know, things feel and how you progress from run to run. But I think the stories sort of stand toe to toe with one another. So I'd give it that as well. So yeah, Saros, very much a, you know, like I said, I think it'll be interesting to see come Game of the Year time to see like what the sort of like the voting, the gaming community that votes on the Game Awards, like how they split on it. But I could see it being, you know, one of the 6 nominees for Game of the Year at the Game Awards. So still plenty of year ahead. But that's Saros, y'all. Go out and play it. And Matthew, we're going to take a quick break. But when we get back, we're going to keep the discourse moving with Mixtape. And we're back. Matthew, what if I told you that prior to, well, I guess shortly prior to us recording this episode, the highest rated, or one of the highest rated games of the year was going to be Mixtape. This is, for those of you who haven't heard of Mixtape, this is an interactive narrative adventure game. It's developed by Beethoven and Dinosaur. It's published by Annapurna Interactive. But yeah, when this came out, it was like it like reviews across the board glowing. It's since come down on OpenCritic. It was at one point the highest rated game of 2026 on OpenCritic. It no longer is, which I think speaks to the trajectory that this game has been on. It came out sort of unanimous glowing praise, and then there's just been this outrageous, I would say, pushback against the sort of merits and good qualities and sort of praise that this game got. So Matthew, you and I have played varying amounts of Mixtape. I've played through and beaten it. You are not quite done with it yet, but we wanted to wade into the discourse ourselves nonetheless. I think this game is good. I think it's a good, borderline great game. You know, I think, you know, one of the debates that we'll get into is just how much of a game this is. But I think for what it aspires to be and what it offers you, the player, I think it knocks it out of the park. I think it's, you know, it's a fun narrative adventure game. You know, it tells this really fun coming of age story. It's really well written. It's, you know, not without its faults in terms of the writing, but I think overall it's really well written. You know, the characters are, you know, mostly enjoyable. Once again, we can get into that, but, you know, by and large, you know, and, you know, the gameplay sequences, while, you know, interspersed and not quite as intrusive as other games, or prominent as other games. I think they're all fun and enjoyable. That being said, like I said, I do have like knocks on this game, both in terms of the writing, just the characters. I think the protagonist is just not likable. And I think we can talk about the relatability, like just, how relatable she is as a person. I think, the fact that this game came out and got such sort of glowing universal praise speaks to the fact that there's one type of dude or one type of person reviewing games out there right now. And I think this game very much speaks to that guy. And I didn't have that experience growing up of being like a shitty teenage kid, right? Like we were, I won't speak for you, Matthew, but we were good kids for the most part. But yeah, what were your thoughts on Mixtape based on what you've played of it so far, Matthew?
I pretty much agree. I mean, I think, I think this game is the best game of the year? No, I don't. But I get why some people might think that it's their favorite game of the year. I also like, yeah, the discourse around this, it's so hard to predict when a game is going to, when it's going to have that kind of reaction, when it's going to become the main character of the internet for a week or whatever. I certainly would not have estimated that Mixtape would be this game. If I have to pinpoint one thing that I think probably set it off, it was the 10 that IGN gave it. IGN being like the most, or the most widely read, mainstream gaming outlet, where a lot of people that I would consider like your typical gamers will get their review recommendations from. Not to overgeneralize, but that's just kind of how I characterize it in my head.
They also tend to be punching bag of that person, which, going back to our previous conversation, those guys should play Saros and understand like how to be better people, but continue.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think like speaking to the game itself, I think most of what it does is working. I think the writing is pretty good. I think it is a rare game that knows how to write. Like the writers know how to write a teenager. I mean, think about how many teenagers are in games that just that don't feel like an authentic teenager. I think this is good at capturing, maybe you didn't live through this period, but this is what this is and maybe this isn't every teenager, obviously. Like these teenagers are extremely well read and articulate.
Yeah.
But their attitudes and the way that they view the world and kind of the inconsistencies and incongruencies in their actions and everything really does sort of speak to like an authentic teenage experience or like an actual teenage person. So I think and to add on to that, I think it's funny. It's hard to write a
genuinely
funny game like this. Yeah. And they really kind of nail that. Even down to like some of the, like non-character moments. Like there's an early sequence when they're essentially running from the police in a shopping cart. And, you're getting their memory of it, which is not the authentic thing. So there's like tons of cop cars. They're going on an expressway. There's like a helicopter following them. And you've got like the news flash where it's like, I wrote this down. It says, teens lead police on bizarre chase. Are drugs and heavy metal music to blame? And it's just kind of very self-aware and knows what it's doing, what it's trying to do. And you can tell that every little piece of it has been crafted from a place, of care.
I'll add my anecdote on here, and this is a mild spoiler towards the end of the game, but the entire sort of narrative crux of the game is, you're trying to find your older sister's hidden booze stash for your end of the year graduation party before you all go off in your separate ways after senior year of high school. And so and you finally make it to the party, and you're working your way around the party with a camcorder, and there's it's kind of just these small little scenes that play out of all the kids and all the neighborhood and all your school friends getting into trouble at the party. But there's a shot of Cassandra, who's one of the three main friends, doing like sort of reenacting the famous meme of the guy like talking into the girl's ear while the girl has like the most unimpressed look on her face. And so like, just going back to your point of like, this game is really self-aware. Like, it knows that its core audience is sort of chronically online, and it's always making those sort of references. I think that sort of is a nice segue into conversation about like one of the main sort of quote unquote controversies around the game is this nostalgia bait? Like, is there an inauthenticity to the way that this is like, I think one of the criticisms that I've seen levied is that like no teenager that grew up in the 90s had this exact playlist. Like, this is very much like a, 30 something year old writing a teenager. Did you get that at all, Matthew, in your experience? Like, you are kind of like the white millennial that seems to be the target demographic here.
Yeah, I mean, we're like, you and I are a bit young for this period. Yeah. These are kids who are in high school when we were toddlers, basically. So I this isn't like my experience, and like some of what the discourse has been is like, this is inauthentic. Like, this is not a lived experience. Like, the developers of this game are people primarily from like Australia. This wasn't their childhood either. They're mm-hmm. kind of aping this rose tinted like recollection of a time that didn't exist and that they didn't live through. And I think that on its own is somewhat a fair criticism, but this is just games. Like, you get like Ghost of Tsushima and Ghost of Yotei right. made by like, Sucker Punch in America. Like it and should you be consulting the people on things like that, who actually have that experience? Hopefully, yes. But I don't think this is such a like an inoffensive type of nostalgia here, right? Like there's no no one's identity is being appropriated here. Like this is mm-hmm. It's so and it's well trodden ground too, especially in like in the film space. Like, this isn't there's enough reference material here, and what they're doing is
it's definitely like there's a lot of inspiration and motivation. Like I definitely go back to like like the community too. Like it's sort of like this affluent group of kids, like them being sort of like well spoken and whatever. So like that kind of makes them easy punching bags as well.
Yeah, and I mean that ties into like you mentioned that the main character is like not a very likable person. That's actually one of my favorite things about this game is that it doesn't try to make every character likable, especially the main character. Like, this is the main character who is defined by their obsession with this one thing, which is music for her. And so even if you as a kid didn't have that as your obsession, or know somebody who had that as an obsession, you can I guarantee you knew somebody who did have an obsession who made it their entire personality and is kind of like her, And so in that regard, some of the things that they're talking about here and what they're depicting are universal, regardless of whether you lived through this exact variant of it. You know what I mean? In this exact period, right? Like that's something that is independent of time or place. So and that person is not always a good person, or is not always self-aware, or you like that person can be annoying, or self-destructive in some ways. And I think the fact that it does not try to file off the inconsistencies in how these characters are portrayed makes them feel more real, and that alone is something that you don't get a whole lot in any kind of game, really. And so that's right. That's a big point to its credit in my book.
Yeah, and I agree with you, like in terms of the way that, like they grew on me by the end of it because of their imperfections. Because yeah, like that was sort of a big sticking point for me, was just like that I couldn't latch on to any of them. Eventually, Cass grew on me a little bit. Slater, by the end of the game, I ended up really enjoying him. And yeah, even Stacy, where like, while I don't think I would be friends with her in real life, ultimately I grew to like her as a person, just because she was this sort of like authentic, real, person that, yeah, like you don't see a lot of in video games. So yeah, I definitely, I definitely think, one thing we haven't really talked about is these sort of gameplay sequences that sort of stitch everything together here, right? Like this is, it's called Mixtape. Everything sort of plays out as a mixtape. And, while the song, like when the needle drop happens and the music starts playing, like you're playing these sort of crazy, fantastical sequences. Is that enough of you, for you, like in terms of, it being called a game, so to speak? Like, is that the quote unquote not a real game discourse like misguided? And if so, like, what does that say about like who you would recommend this for? So like Matthew, like what, like who in your mind is like the target audience? Like who should play this?
I think the like, is it a game or not arguments are like not in good faith. I really think that there's like this is an argument that people have been having for decades now, really. Like seriously, since like the 20, like earlier than 2010, basically. Yeah. People have been talking about this, and I mean, I don't think it's ever going to go away. There's always going to be a subclass of gamers who only view games as one thing. And I don't even feel like engaging with those people is productive at this point, because they're not open to changing their mind or viewing anybody else's opinion on the subject. I mean, obviously this is a game. It's a video game. You interact with it. So yes, I consider games like this games. I consider games with a lot less interactivity than this games as well. But as to who I would like recommend this game to, who's the game for, I first of all, I mean, as polarizing as this game has been, I really think everybody should play polarizing games, like of any genre, of anything. I think they are kind of a rare opportunity to have like big moments of critical disagreement and discussion, and of course that gets like shorthanded to discourse online, but it doesn't have to be kind of like bad faith discourse. It can be also just like people getting inspired to talk about their experiences with something as you would any other kind of controversial art form. I think, like, especially for games that are as short as this, when they hit that critical mass and are controversial, I think it's worth. I think everybody should play these, because it's the big reactions mean, whether they're positive or negative, I think they mean that these games have struck on something new for a lot of people, and it's worthwhile to explore what that newness is for other people, even if you find it's not for you. It might be. It doesn't have to be, but just seeing what that is. I think it's just important for people to play games outside of their comfort zone. I think too many people stick to what they're comfortable with, in general. And I think this is, if nothing else, a good opportunity to kind of broaden the sorts of games that you expose yourself to.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think, while I would love to see more like mixtapes that tackle different stories from different perspectives. And I fully intend that to be like, or I fully anticipate that to become a thing, just given the discourse around this game. Remains to be seen whether or not it actually finds success. But I agree with you. Like, I think, I liken this to a movie ticket, and I think with the shorter runtime, it's only 3 or 4 hours long. It's and it's only $20, right? So like, that's the price of like what you would spend on a movie, a 2.5 hour movie. So yeah, pick it up, play it for yourself and like experience it. And then, yeah, like, critique it. Like, that's what we're all here to do, is just, make art and talk about that art and find ways that we can make better art. And so, like, yeah, I think this is sort of while the discourse around this game has sort of devolved into this negative, weird, the way that discourse around games typically goes, I do think I've had some of the most constructive discourse around just the state of the industry and writing in games and like representation in games without it going to that place. So yeah, I definitely agree with you there. And I think, like I said, Mixtape I think it's well worth I think what they're doing from a gameplay perspective and a narrative perspective, I think it totally warrants purchasing. But then, yeah, inform yourself before you just make, asinine comments on YouTube.
100%.
But yeah, man, that's Mixtape. It's out virtually everywhere. Nintendo Switch 2, PlayStation 5, PC, and Xbox Series consoles. Like I said, it's $20. It is also available through Game Pass, if I'm not mistaken. Correct, Matthew?
Correct, yes.
So yeah, I mean, if you're a Game Pass subscriber, you really have no reason to not to pick it up. You can beat it in like the span of an afternoon. So yeah, that's Mixtape, and hope there are more games like it that come out in the near future. Speaking of games that are in the near future, so to speak, Matthew, you are here to talk to us about Marathon Season 1. So this dropped. Marathon, remind me when Marathon dropped. This is a couple of months ago at this point, right?
March, essentially, towards the end of March.
So yeah, it's definitely had, it's had its headlines for sure, player counts and sales numbers, and Sony has written off like $785 million loss, related to the Bungie acquisition. So all that to say that there's a lot riding on this game, and people are already sort of starting to construct like meta narratives around it, but there's not really been a lot discussed around the game. Like, I think what I've seen from an outside perspective is that it's found a really dedicated but small audience that is really passionate about what's going on. And it seems like, based on what I've seen around the season 1 response, both from the community and Bungie to the community, it seems like they're listening and implementing some changes. And there's some things that they've sort of teased out for season 2 and beyond that have me, someone who sort of like dabbled in it but like ultimately thought it was too sweaty, it has me looking at potentially jumping in. So Matthew, what are your thoughts on Marathon Season 1?
So I teased, when we were talking about Saros, that Saros was the second most conflicted I have felt about a game in 2026, with Marathon being the number one. It is a game of really high highs and really low lows. That ultimately, I think it has a strong identity, but it tries to, like that, the identity that it does have and that it has chosen to have is maybe what is limiting some of the things that it can do and the people that it's appealing to. So yeah, I mean, my experience with this has been up and down over the 2 months since it launched. Ultimately, I think season 1, like it's been a pretty successful launch. Bungie has, they've listened to what people have asked for, both in terms of small things like weapon balance, inventory sizes, things like that. And also, making what they call like experimental cues in terms of like, one of the big talking points about this game is that you're always playing in a 3-player team when you queue in, unless you play as the spoiler, essentially, who like you're a particular class who goes in solo, and your job is to try to take out the runners like middle of their run. But most of the time you're playing, in a group of 3. And I think, kind of like with Apex Legends, being in a group, forcing people to be in a group of 3, it kind of limits things. Or,
Yeah, I thought we learned this lesson already. Like, it seems so weird that, like, like multiplayer shooters are like still having this issue with like queue sizes. And I get that, like, it being an extraction shooter and like, you losing items on death, like you want to be really sensitive around like how team composition can be balanced. So you don't want like any of those unfair moments. But yeah, it just seems weird that like we're still talking about like, how many players can, like what's appropriate, 1v1, 3v3, and so on and so forth. So what do you make of like, what are they teasing out? Like, kind of lay that out for us.
So they've done a lot of experimenting of like duos. They haven't, they have their solo option, which I haven't really gotten the impression that they are considering changing. Like they want the people who are dropping into the maps to be at least to have another player, because so much of what the normal experience is involves playing off each other, and then you have your revive. So if you don't have anybody with you, there's no chance you can be in the down but not out state where you can crawl around or do any of that stuff. And I mean, I see that, like, I agree that I don't know that this game would be quite the same if you were solo. Like, and Arc Raiders is the big other extraction shooter at the moment. And we've talked about Arc Raiders, a good bit in the past, and they're very different. I think that, people who had Arc Raiders as their first extraction shooter experience and then come into Marathon, they're going to be very surprised by what they find here, because while they are both extraction shooters in name, they play entirely differently, and the type of person who is going to gravitate towards one or the other is going to be very different. I think, I mean, Marathon is just structured as a PvP game, period. Like it is not interested in really having the social dynamics that Arc Raiders has thrived on. If you go into Marathon expecting that, as I did at launch, or not maybe not expecting it, but hoping to find some of that emergent, like that emergent social gameplay, they're going to be disappointed. In the entirety of what I have played since launch, I've never had an interaction with another player on another team that was not immediately shoot on sight. And I have never heard a single person speak in proximity chat. Wow. Maybe that is not a representative experience, for everybody, but for me and what I've played, for, I don't know, over 20 hours, that has been my experience. And I think that kind of adds up to feeling like you're just playing a competitive multiplayer shooter. And I think if you approach it if you go in knowing that, if you're like, okay, this is a competitive game, like queue up for it like you would a game of Halo multiplayer or something. Right. And if you come into it with that mentality that, I'm going to get into gunfights with other players, and I need to figure out how to make that work for me, and that's what I'm interested in doing, I think there's a lot of fun to be had here. As long as you know what you're getting and you know what the game is designed to give you.
Yeah. So where's the fun? Like, where are you finding the fun overall? Because, like, I think back to Arc Raiders, right? And like how, for me, a lot of the fun wasn't necessarily even tied to if I interacted with other players. Certainly that added to the tension and my enjoyment of it, right? Like whether, if I had a positive interaction, but like, how does that sort of like, what are you sort of coming back to, what's bringing you back?
I think the fun. So what I'll say is initially, like when you first started up at the beginning of the game or at the beginning of the season, I'm not exactly sure how it's going to go with season 2, how much they're going to make you redo. But the fun at first is getting to know the different factions that you're taking contracts for. They're all very colorful. They each have like a persona associated with them that's giving you these quests essentially. And it's you converse with them when you pick up what they call like priority contracts, which are like the main story ones. There's some throwaway ones that you can like do on repeat to just like kind of gain faction or whatever. But the priority contracts are the ones that are tied into what the faction is asking of you and the exploration of the narrative in terms of what happened to the Marathon colony. Okay. And so that stuff is all really cool. It's delivered in kind of like a visual novel format. As you're interacting with these factions for the first time. And that was all really, really good at first. Then it does get very grindy to where you're grinding those faction contracts, those repeatable ones before like you can get enough reputation with them and unlock the next priority one. And that was a big complaint of mine this season. And it's something that Bungie has said they're going to address in the next season. They're going to make it quicker for you to get those contracts. So I think that's a big win, and it's going to allow me, someone who's not sinking like hundreds of hours into this, to actually maybe get to see more of what the story is here with the factions. So I'm looking forward to that in season 2. The other fun that I get out of this game is I think this is sort of a condemnation of some of the extraction mechanics here, but I find I have the most fun when I just take like what they call like a sponsored loadout, meaning like you're not using any guns that you extracted with. This is like a free loadout that a faction is providing you, and you drop in with nothing, and you kind of see how much you can loot and get out with, because it tells you how much how much the value of the items you've acquired that you extracted at the end is. And that's pretty fun to me. I like going in with no stakes, and then that way if you die, it's fine. It's
especially in a game where it's like sweaty.
Yes. And I think it does feel better to go in with a higher value loadout, because it doesn't necessarily spawn you into a game with other people who are doing sponsored loadouts, and part of that may be down to the player count. I honestly don't know. I've noticed that as we've gotten further away from launch, the queue times for me can get pretty long. I don't really know how many people are playing this game right now, and I know that's been like the big point of discussion.
Right.
So
yeah. So I mean, we talk about obviously like there's a lot of eyes on Bungie. The spotlight, so to speak, is on them. It seems, like by all accounts, like I don't have like the hard numbers in front of me, but it seems like by all accounts, like 10,000-ish daily concurrent players. Definitely doesn't seem to be like a huge commercial success. It's, seems to have sold the majority of its, copies on PC. So even like not really doing a lot for PlayStation as a publisher here. But yeah, so I mean, like, shifting over to something more positive, right? Like season 2, like they're teasing a lot here. Like namely among that is like a PvE mode. So like they definitely have plans, it seems, to sort of open the player base up. Is any of what they're teasing out, like, do you think they'll achieve any of it? And is there anything in particular that's speaking to you?
So it's hard to say. They've been kind of they've teased is definitely the right word here.
Right.
Some of the stuff for season 2 about like at the beginning of the season 2, they're going to have a PvP light experimental mode where it's I would guess that it basically entails fewer players on the map and less incentives to going after those players, maybe. Which sounds interesting. And then in the second half of the season, they said there's going to be an actual PvE only mode to where you can, accomplish things and progress certain objectives, without being able to either shoot other players or I don't know if it means you're not going to have other players in your game other than AI and the people that you drop in with on your team. I would imagine that's probably what it is. But that stuff sounds intriguing, and I think it speaks to the player count problem, which is that what they need, they've got a strong dedicated core right now, from what they've said and what investigators and journalists have found out. There's a strong player base, like the core player base who really likes what's there, but in order to keep this thing afloat, you've got to find a way to bring in new people, because I mean the player count has gone down, not up, since launch. And
that's common, right? Like you see that big spike, people are jumping in, checking it out, and they kind of drift off over time, and you're left with what is presumably the hardest of the hardcore. But yeah, when you've spent 3.6 or 3.7 whatever Sony spent $billion to acquire Bungie, and they've essentially sunset Destiny 2, everything's sort of riding on this, and like the numbers, like the math just isn't mathing in terms of like what Sony, I would imagine, is expecting on a return. But I really do think, like there's potential here with like a PvE mode, especially, you pair it with something like a free weekend. I think you can, I think if you make concessions to the more, casual audience, I think you can sort of win some, not goodwill, but like, sort of get some air in your sails, so to speak. And then maybe it goes from there. But yeah, I feel like it really is going to hinge on how people receive the PvE mode and some of the balance changes. Because I think if we're coming out of season 2 and there's still the perception that this is for like the hardest of the hardcore, the sweatiest of the sweats, like I think this isn't going to find the audience I think that they're looking for.
I agree. I think it's definitely a precarious situation. Everything that they've outwardly communicated has not, I don't think they've laid off anybody else since launch. No. I don't think, like they haven't said like, oh, we're we'll have to see how this goes, or I don't know how much support we're going to get. Like they've actively stated that, they have plans on, into year 2, essentially, right, of it. So that they are outwardly signaling that this is done well enough for them to continue to support. Now, I think that could change if it really takes a nosedive here. But I think that they should be more interested, because it's about. I mean, it's tricky because they can't alienate the dedicated core that they have, right?
Yeah.
But they've also got to try to find in ways to bring in some new sales. And maybe that's just, as simple as like making the game cheaper or something after we get a little bit further away from launch. I don't know, but I think
a discount along, maybe a free weekend, to coincide with this PvE, like really try to like hook line the casuals. I think that's probably your best bet. And then, if that doesn't hit, like, I don't know what else will bring. 'Cause like, as like someone like me, right? Like the art style is great. It's Bungie. They've got the pedigree for good shooters, but there's just something about the structure of it. And, I think one thing that they've also mentioned that they're going to do is address in season 2 is the onboarding. 'Cause it already does feel like there's just this mountain that you have to sort of overcome just to even understand the game and all of the different item names and what does what. So I think that those are sort of the two main things that they need to do. But like to be able to do that without alienating this sort of hardcore player base that you built up is going to be a challenge.
Yeah, and I mean the onboarding problem was the whole bane of Destiny 2. You know, that was like the classic complaint, of mine included. And when you tried to come back to Destiny, you felt like you had to like learn a bunch of new stuff. So, with them adding even more mechanics in season 2 of Marathon, they're going to add an additional like way to customize your character's stats or something like that. They haven't really delved into that yet. But that's just another layer of complexity that they're going to have to figure out how to tutorialize new players on. So, yeah, I mean, I've gone, like I said, I've gone really back and forth. I've gone through stages of disappointment to like, denial, acceptance, like all the stages of grief I've gone through with this game. Ultimately, I think it is. It's just not going to be the game that I want it to be. It is instead going to be a game that I come back to and, occasionally to see if they've done something new with the narrative. Cause that's really what I want here. But with as hardcore as you have to be, like it's a high skill ceiling game. You have to be good at it, and you got to put a bunch of time in to be able to see all of the story stuff yourself. And I think for as long as that barrier exists, unless it comes down significantly, it's going to be hard to get me super excited. But I like that it's found an audience. I like that there's people who really love it and really love what it's doing. I think thematically the game is like fantastic. Like you mentioned, the art direction. I think the whole the way that you are all essentially gig workers working for these powerful factions, and disposable bodies. Like you have like Citizen Sleeper vibes a little bit in terms of the way the body that you're running and it's not yours, and you're just picking up scraps. You are the fodder for these corporations who are not even in the same like solar system that you are. So I think that like the vibes are super cool, and I think there's a ton of potential for the story with the Marathon ship and some of the revelations that they have that they went into with their end game map this season about like the boss in there and everything. So I think there's a ton of potential for them to keep exploring the narrative of in a Destiny-esque way, and I think if they can find a way to make that stuff more approachable and more attainable to casuals while still keeping the hardcore stuff for the people who like that, I could see them maybe not taking off the player count, like seeing it blow up, but maintaining it and getting a diversity of players in there that allows us to be sustainable long term.
Well, here's hoping that Sony gives them the runway to make it happen. Always rooting for Bungie. I want them to continue making great shooters. They're one of the best in the business. So I hope Marathon continues to cater to and grow its audience as well. Speaking of catering to and growing audiences, Matthew, it's time for us to sign off. But before we do, I want to remind you guys that you can listen to past episodes and find us on your social network of choice. Follow us at timekillerspod.com. DM us your questions, your comments, hot takes, any suggestions for the show. We're all ears. And if you're listening to us, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Matthew, before we log off, anything you want to say to the good folks listening at home?
See you on Tau Ceti.
See you on Tau Ceti, one of the many iterations of it. Y'all have a great night. We'll see you on the next one.